All right, our midday keynote, Lieutenant General Xavier Brunson, is here, and we look forward to his comments and his introduction by predecessor of his, Lieutenant General Steve Lanza. But before I welcome Steve to the podium, we have another special guest here today, Rear Admiral Mark Ciccato, who's commander of U.S. Navy Region Northwest. And you may recall at the outset, I said one of our purposes for the Pacific Security Forum is to talk about the great units and leaders that are stationed here in the Pacific Northwest. So let me tell you a little bit about Admiral Ciccato and then about his unit. We'll ask him to stand. He's a naval aviator, Top Gun guy, so he's going to do a Hollywood wave. And then tragically, he has to leave for another meeting. So it's kind of, you can make a really cool departure. And okay. Rear Admiral Mark Ciccato graduated with honors from the United States Naval Academy in 1994 with a Bachelor of Science degree in ocean engineering. He also holds master's degrees from Salve Regina University and the Naval Postgraduate School. As I mentioned, he's an aviator with 3,000 flight hours in strike fighter aircraft, including the F-14 Tomcat, F-5 Tiger II, and F-A-18. And is both a graduate of the United States Navy's Top Gun Fighter Weapons School and a combat experienced forward air controller with combat deployments in support of Operation Southern Watch, Desert Fox, Enduring Freedom, and Iraqi Freedom. His command tours include being commanding officer of Fighter Squadron Composite 12 Ambush and Naval Air Station Joint Reserve Base New Orleans. He assumed command of the Navy Region Northwest in May 2022, and that's why we've asked him to be here today. The Navy Region Northwest is one of several United States Navy regions responsible to the Commander Naval Installations Command for operation and management of naval shore installations. So the command oversees the assigned shore organization and provides facilities and space management, exercise coordination, and support to home-ported and transient ships, submarines, and aircraft, as well as those afloat and ashore tenants and military and family members. Puget Sound, the broader area, is the U.S. Navy's third largest fleet concentration area in the world. The major installations here are Naval Air Station Whidbey Island, Naval Station Everett, Naval Base Kitsap, which includes Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, Submarine Base Bangor, Naval Undersea Warfare Center Keyport, Manchester Fuel Depot, and Naval Magazine Indian Island. It's quite an array of installations that report to Admiral Ciccato. The Department of the Navy spends about $5.5 billion a year in the broader region in the Pacific Northwest. This region's home to approximately 21,000 active duty service members, Navy, 16,000 civilians, 6,000 reservists, 40,000 family members, and 35,000 Navy retirees. Admiral Ciccato shared with me earlier that the next decade will really bring a bow wave of increased investment, Navy investment in this region, in installations and capabilities. His headquarters are on the Naval Base Kitsap on the former grounds of Naval Submarine Base Bangor. It's a delight to welcome you here, Admiral Ciccato. He mentioned earlier, I am your admiral. And I thought, oh, that's kind of nice. I mean, I work pretty closely with, his point is, I'm responsible, my command is responsible for all of the activities except those operational activities of the many Navy units that are stationed here. So, Admiral Ciccato, please stand. We'd like to greet you. Thank you. Thank you for the important work you and your units do in support of our national security interests. At this point, I'm going to welcome Lieutenant General Steve Lanza, who will introduce our guest. Lieutenant General Lanza is a member of MBR's Board of Advisors. He served as Commanding General of I-Corps at Joint Base Lewis-McChord from February 2014 to April 2017, which is the culmination of a long and distinguished career as a U.S. Army officer. He was commissioned in the Field Artillery after graduating from the United States Military Academy at West Point. He's a comments from the two generals. I've always enjoyed that. He commanded soldiers at all levels, from battery to corps. It's pretty remarkable. And he will introduce our keynote speaker, Lieutenant General Brunson.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And Roy, thank you for those nice comments. I have a really great privilege today of introducing a great friend, a superb leader, and more importantly, an accomplished warfighter, my good friend, Lieutenant General Xavier Brunson. X is the commanding general, as Roy said, of 1st U.S. Corps, America's Corps, and Joint Base Lewis-McChord. This command is essential. We talked about building partner capacity this morning, but it's essential to supporting U.S. Army Pacific Command, Indo-PACOM in the Pacific Theater. Operations such as Pacific Pathways and many of the other things that General Brunson does, Talisman Sabre and many others, contribute to the readiness, the stability, and the operational readiness in that theater. A little bit about General Brunson. As a general officer, he served in numerous staff and command positions. I think you can see from the folders in front of you, both in conventional and special operations forces, a lot of time at Fort Bragg. So he is definitely a Fort Bragg soldier through and through, and that's good to see. His operational assignments have been in Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Freedom Sentinel, and Inherent Resolve. So a lot of time deployed in theater. He was commissioned as an infantry officer from Hampton University with a Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science. He's earned a Master of Arts degree in Human Resources from Webster University, a Master's of Science in National Security from the Army War College, as well as a Security Studies, from the Army War College. He has many notable civic awards, including the Omega Sci-Fi Award for Brother Julian Haywood from the Gamma Epsilon Leadership Award, the National Park Service Trailblazer Award from the Buffalo Soldiers, and the following honors from many U.S. Army regimental services, such as the Infantry School, the Artillery School, the Intelligence School, Civil Affairs. He has 2 daughters and 1 son, and he's married to Kirsten, who is a colonel, retired colonel, and an accomplished soldier in her own right. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm round of applause for Lieutenant General Xavier Brunson.
I had honestly long form remarks, okay? But during rehearsal back at the office, as I tried to turn with my left hand, I kept knocking the book off the podium. So what I'm going to do is I want to stand to honor you all for being here today, but I would ask that you indulge me and just allow me to sit back down and talk to you for a little bit. My right arm is heavier than I ever believed it could be. So I'm going to sit back down, but I do want to just give you just a brief thumbnail sketch of what it is I do as a Corps commander, and then what it is that I do when I'm forward in the region, dealing with 32 nations, friends, partners, and allies across the spectrum of nations that we deal with in the region. So if that would be fair with you all, I'd like to please take my seat. All right. Thank you, sir. Get the former VCNO to let you sit down as an Army guy, then you're doing pretty good for yourself. My chief accomplishment here today thus far has been that I opened a bottle of water by myself with my left hand. What I do all day, every day, though, is I think about places where we go west to get east. I think about that every day. The Corps is made up of some 50,000 soldiers across 3 divisions and a host of what we call enabling brigades. Those enabling brigades do things like communications, intelligence, and fires. And by fires, we mean artillery. As General Lanza mentioned, he's an artilleryman. But we have artillery brigades as well. So we have the 7th Infantry Division, about 14,000 soldiers, which is at Joint Base Lewis-McChord, just south by Tacoma there. And then we have the 11th Airborne Division, 16,000 soldiers who are in Alaska, spread between 2 bases there. And then we have the 25th Infantry Division, which is based in Hawaii. And we've got about 18,000 soldiers there within that division. And then you've got my Corps staff. What we're tasked to do is act as the operational headquarters for Indo-PACOM, Indo-Pacific Command. As an operational headquarters, that places me right below the strategic, but with all the problems that have to be solved by people face to face. That's what we do all day, every day. We do that as a member of the Joint Force. We work alongside the Navy partners that we have, the Marine Corps, the Air Force, anybody who'll come and across the embassies in the region as well. We work with anybody who comes to help us solve the problems that are important to the people in the region. People say that's an air and maritime theater. And I would tell you that there are no people. Did anybody ever see the movie Waterworld? If you saw the movie Waterworld, you'll understand why this is not just a maritime theater. It's one of those Rotten Tomatoes. It's maybe like a 35 to 40 on Rotten Tomatoes, okay? So if you ever get bored and you need something to do, watch Waterworld with Kevin Costner in it. I think that movie was made right after he got his Oscar. Like many people do, they do anything once they get an Oscar. But people live on the land. All of our problems are on the land. I use this analogy sometimes when I talk to people about what does it mean to be a land force in what's traditionally been thought of as an air and maritime theater. I'm old enough to remember the Thrilla in Manila. That happened in the Philippines. It was a fight with Ali in it. People took boats and they took planes to get to that fight. But the fight was on the land. And we have to sometimes remember that where people are, or where a great many of the challenges that exist within the region come. And they don't have uniquely military solutions to any of the problems that we face. These problems will require a whole of government, whole of nation, whole of everybody in order to ensure things are being accounted for, like rising sea levels. That's a problem in places within the region. When you live in an archipelagic environment, as the water rises, you begin to have problems. But we have to bring those things to bear. Gone are the days where we could go forward and do civic action projects like build a school and then not look at it again until the next year. We're continuing to try to drive across not only my corps, but across the United States Army and the Joint Force writ large is continued engagement within the region. Recognizing that words mean things. Engagement means that if I see Admiral Green now, I should see him and speak to him every time I see him because I'm engaged with him. Engagement is why today was the first day I've ever called you Roy right out the box. He's Mr. Kamphausen. But as I continue to engage with him, I become more comfortable so that I can say, Roy, thank you for having me here today. So that's what we're starting to realize. These things cannot be transactional. They can't be episodic. They have to be continuous. They have to be intentional. And we have to also understand what's important to other folks. U.S. interests are not the only interest in the world. We find ourselves better partners when we understand the unique interest of the countries with which we engage with. Over the course of about 9 to 10 months out of the year, we'll find ourselves forward in the region. For example, in December, I think, right? 2nd of December, we take off to go to Japan. And we'll be in Japan for about 17 days right before Christmas, participating in an exercise that happens every year. But what's unique about the way it's happening now is I'll be operating from a Japanese base. And so as we as an Army, as a joint force, try to understand better about how to change our posture in the region, more often than not, that's accomplished by the way that we tend to work alongside our partners. That gives us space, that gives us places, that gives us the opportunity to impact their ability to protect and sustain their own forces. So subject to any questions you right now, I'm going to stop right there. Great. Thank you.
I'm going to ask a couple questions, and then as we've been doing all day, invite you all to go to one of the microphones and ask a question of General Brunson. My first question is really maybe to give our audience a sense of how you've come to this point in your career here at Joint Base Lewis-McChord. There's an amazing photograph, a family photograph on the internet. People ask you about this all the time, I'm sure. But before I first went to meet General Brunson a couple years ago, of course, I Googled him, stalked him a little bit to understand a bit about his background. And this powerful photo of your family, dad, brothers, sisters, in-laws, and there's, I don't know, 10 Army officers in the group, including your wife, who retired as a colonel. I guess your dad started, right? He was a sergeant major. Tell us about the journey that brought you to this point of being the I Corps commander?
Yeah, it's whenever anyone asks me about that, my mind immediately goes to mistakes I've made along the way. But how did I get here? I got here because my father was in the Army, and I always noticed the way that he felt absolutely responsible for the people he worked alongside. And I also liked the reaction that people would give him as he would go to his office. I can remember being 6 years old, and before I could go to preschool, before I'd go to school in the morning, I would go to work with my dad. And I just remember that, man, those people really like him. And I always had this sense of, man, if you wear that uniform, people respect you. You have the opportunity to impact the lives of other people. And so that's where it started for me. I never wanted to be a doctor, a lawyer, a politician, or anything else other than being a soldier. And over the course of the 32 years that I've been doing this, there's been times where I've gone and done what we call the height of any profession is the test, right? And the test in the Army for us is going to combat. So I've been and I've done the test some 6 years in my career. I've been in combat. But the real test for me now is the things that I've done over the past 5 years since I've come to this region. General Lanza talked about all the time I spent at Fort Bragg. I was at Fort Bragg for 15 years, 15 of my 32 years before I came out here to command the 7th Infantry Division, as General Lanza did, and then this Corps. I never really looked this way. It wasn't important to me. Everything that was going on in my life was in the Middle East. But I've come to take that same passion I have for service and then apply it to the things that I'm doing in the region, because I know that it matters. It gives me the opportunity to be a lot more like my dad. So that's really more of what keeps me serving, vice what got me here. I met my wife in Germany, and she will tell anybody that she came to Germany looking for a BMW or a cuckoo clock, and she came back home with me. My wife Kirsten's in the Army Women's Hall of Fame. She was just inducted last year. She was the first African-American female judge in the United States Army, and she sat on the bench for 6 years before she retired. My brothers are both out of brigade level command, and they're both off doing great things right now. And I can remember a time as a colonel when my brothers were lieutenant colonels. There's 10 years between us. And I remember thinking, I'm going to probably have to get out of this Army because they're going to pass me. There's no way I'm calling my baby brother sir. So, but they're phenomenal officers in their own right. But it all starts with my dad and watching what he did and the sacrifices he made. I won't go deep into this because it'll make me cry, literally. I can remember when my father worked 2 jobs. I can remember when he was a staff sergeant in the United States Army. He would get up and he would go to work. There's a wonderful gentleman, General James Lindsay, who was the commander of the 82nd Airborne Division and the commander of U.S. Army, U.S. Special Operations Command. And my dad ran on a marathon team with him. And their marathon practice was at 4 a.m. So my dad would get up in the morning, he'd go to marathon practice, he'd get done with that, and then he'd go to PT at 6:30. Then he'd work all day long. Then he'd come home, kiss my mom, kiss me, get on his bike, drive back to post, and then he would go work in the bowling alley as a short order cook. So when people say to me sometimes, I bet your dad's proud of what you're doing right now, I say, you're doggone right he's proud. But it's everything that he instilled in me that made me want to be just like him. That's how I end up in the Army.
Amazing. We could probably talk a lot more about that, but we should also talk about the region. And when you and I first met, I said to you, General Brunson, I want to make you an offer that no other Corps commander in the United States Army will receive. And that is, I want you to think of us at NBR as your hometown think tank. And so we have lots of engagements with your staff and with units. We have a bunch of guys here from the first group who we've interacted with before and are joining us here today. And as you said, you'd spent a lot of your time early in your career thinking about the Middle East. You deployed there a lot. but now you've commanded a division in the Corps here looking to the Pacific. What strikes you about the operating environment in the Pacific when you first came, and maybe as you reflect on it now after several years of looking at it? You made the point about it's not just an air and maritime theater. That's a misnomer. It's a bad movie.
Yeah.
But what else about that operating environment?
I think a lot of times people don't realize how big the region actually is. So it's no small thing that when we were operating in Australia and from Australia, Guam, and we had a small force in the Philippines, that I was operating my Corps across 6 different time zones. That's a thing right there. But then to have our higher headquarters here in the United States say, hey, oh, by the way, we need you to do an EDRI to a place in Illinois while you're in doing all those
What's
things.
an EDRI?
An EDRI, I'm sorry.
I know what an EDRI is.
Emergency Deployment Readiness Exercise. I'll just leave this up as just something that you can look at. But that's what my Corps had to operate under. And if you just get nothing else from that slide, don't try to understand any symbology other than kilometers. And is it miles? Miles. Well, I want you to do the math and convert those to kilometers because it'll make our discussion that much richer. But those are the distances that I'm being expected to operate under. And I don't mention that as if it's a burden at all, but it's a challenge. The challenges that exist in this environment are legion. And so when we get up to a place, we can't ever say, oh, left that back home. When you get all the way to Australia, 11,000 or so miles away, you can't say, I forgot that. So we have to do a lot of thinking ahead of time, and it's positioning forces forward in a theater that's not a theater of war. So you're trying to explain to an institution that's been focused over 20 plus years on operations in the Middle East that you need to position forces forward, and they go, what for? But competition, as you all know, requires presence. Presence requires posture. And posture really requires a partner to be there. So there are all these steps that we have to go through in order to arrange or organize ourselves that we might be able to provide best effect when we get there. Because it's too late if we just think, hey, let's go to Guam today. Let's go to Thailand tomorrow. Let's go to the Philippines next week. We have to think these things out, and we go to all these places without status of forces agreements. A SOFA is a thing that allows us to be in a country, like you have these all across Europe in the NATO nations that allow U.S. forces to be there. We don't have those things in a large many of the places other than the posture that you know of or recognize that exists within the region already. We have forces that are stationed in Korea. We have forces that are stationed in Japan. And while it's a U.S. territory, we have forces in Guam. We've got air bases there as well. Those places are easy to get to. Those are very, very easy to get to. But when I start to talk to people about getting to Indonesia, and I say, well, we're going to be on these 3 of 17,000 islands, and they go, there aren't 17,000 islands in Indonesia. And I go, well, yeah, you're right. There's 17,700. Only 7,000 of them are actually inhabited. But we have to sometimes take the time to explain what we're a part of. The country teams that are in these nations all understand very well, but our Department of Defense sometimes does not. So we take great pains to explain what it is we're seeking to accomplish, how we're going to accomplish it with people, and then how it supports the national defense strategy. And in this region in particular is the only one I've ever been in where all 3 of those things, those ways that are spoken of by our Secretary of Defense, are all occurring at the same time, ensuring an advantage, enduring advantage in the places we're at, campaigning. Those things are all there all the time, and we're a part of that. That's what I really like about being in this region. Is it's almost like discovering something. Every time we go out the door, there's a new challenge or a leader or a nation that we're dealing with. That's really, really exciting. And when you get this late in the day in your career to be able to do something new and different, it keeps you going.
Hopefully we're no near the end for you. Recently you were in India with U.S. Army Pacific Commander General Flynn. we've been this morning at our session talked a lot about U.S.-China great power competition. As you said, that's a strategic level construct, but it has really operational level impacts, which touch on the work that you do. Talk about our evolving relationship with the Indian Army in the context of, I mean, the Indians they're in their own sort of competition with China. They're not so keen about being pulled too close to us. At the same time, it's valuable to them to have the kind of relationship that you brought when you visited with General Flynn. What were your observations from your time in India?
Yeah. One of the observations I had is the fact that no one wants to be considered a bulwark against. People want to do the things that are important to their nation. They don't want to be set aside as the bulwark against an ascendant China. That's very Thucydidean, that kind of thinking. People are just trying to live. In the region, what we recognize more and more and more is the importance of national sovereignty and the importance of nations to determine their own path and way forward. It's not, if you make this thing binary, and this is what we talk about in the core all the time, we don't want to make this binary at all. You're with us, you're against us. That's like kindergarten. What we want to do is present ourselves as, this is what we have, this is what we're doing, and we'd love you to be a part of it. To that end, there are things that our nation is doing in Ukraine in terms of the provision of lethal aid to the Ukrainians, military equipment. Would probably be the best way to say that. We're providing military solutions to the problems that they have there. We're doing much the same in Israel. We're providing military equipment to solve a problem for them there. And the Indians in particular have bought things from the Russians that aren't working so well, that they can't get parts for. And so there are a couple of programs that touch on the joint base in particular. We're going to have AH-64, the Apache helicopter. It's the armed aviation platform that we have. They're going to bring their pilots to Joint Base Lewis-McChord here in December. They're going to come and look at our Strykers. A Stryker is a 6-wheeled armored platform that carries 9 infantrymen inside of it, and it's got a remote weapon station on top, which means everybody stays inside the vehicle and they can aim and shoot the gun from inside the vehicle while being protected. They're trying to get rid of some of the Russian equipment that they have. So their chief desire in a relationship with us is, and it's not a quid pro quo like, hey, we're going to buy this, so we're going to come train with you. It's, you have a thing that will help us in a position like, everyone's familiar with the line of actual control, correct? It's the border between China and India, and it's been heavily militarized, and there are engagements going on there right now. That's the problem that they're trying to solve, and U.S. materiel is a means of getting at that. But more importantly, one of the things that we do is we run every year an exercise called UWAS. There are two iterations of this exercise. One will always occur at one of my divisional bases, either in Hawaii or Alaska or here at Joint Base Lewis-McChord. And then the next time we'll go to India. So discussions that we had while we were there was, how do we want to continue to shape this exercise? And what I'm finding in India is what I find across the region. We want to do more. My first year at command, we were only in the region about 7 months out of the year. We've gone up to 10. This year we'll be in the region for 10 months out of some echelon, some unit of action within my corps will be in the region forward 10 months out of the year. We get off for Christmas, though.
One of the initiatives that helps you with your presence in the region is called Operation Pathways. Can you talk to us more about that?
So I want to give you this. This is what we talked about. Specific.
Are we doing some work here right now?
Yeah, I just don't want to forget to give that. Operation Pathways. One of the things that the National Defense Strategy talks about is the fact that the United States campaigns, and in terms of looking at campaigning, what we do, our piece of that campaigning is simply this: is that we do an operation called Operation Pathways, which sees us either move along a northern access, route, or central route or even a southern route that brings us into the region and passes us through a host of countries over the course of exercises. So when I start to look at how are we getting into the region this year, we'll kind of say that we'll start from the northern axis, and we'll start out and we'll conduct an exercise in Japan. And then once we get done with the exercise in Japan, we'll hop across to the peninsula and we'll go do an exercise in Korea. And then we'll go from that exercise in Korea, we'll go due south, and we'll drop all the way down to the Philippines. And we'll do an exercise called Salakanib and Balakatan in the Philippines. And then we'll go back north, okay? And we'll go back to Thailand. And then in spring, we'll be in Thailand for an exercise called Cobra Gold. What we've tried to look at is we are maneuvering through the region. And as we go through the region campaigning over a long period of time, what we want to do is engage all the nations we're either bypassing or entering into so that we can assure. That's what we really do. The department at the strategic level talks about integrated deterrence being absolutely important. And it is. I don't deter as a core. I don't. What I can do, though, is assure friends, partners, and allies that when I do come, I'll come with combat credible forces, and I'll come with what you need me to have in your nation to accomplish whatever it is. So if I call you Thailand and you say, hey, last time you came, you brought all that artillery. We don't need that. What we need you to do is go back and check these projects you did 2 years ago. And I go, got it. That means when I move to Thailand, I need to have forces pushed from the United States with engineers and civil affairs personnel to go and check on these projects and see what the problems are. See, a lot of times we weren't doing these things. So as governments change, for example, Duterte was in the Philippines. That made Philippines a no-go zone for us. We couldn't get back in the country at all. Well, over the time that he was the president, there were projects that we had no means of checking the progress on those things. So when we finally fall back into these places about a year ago, we went back to the Philippines, and they're a mess. And they're a mess just because no one's gone and done any preventive maintenance on these projects. No one's gone back. And we did not think enough to say, you know what? We could probably talk to somebody in the country team. We could probably call the embassy and say, hey, can you guys maybe get down over to Port Aguinaldo and look at the things that we left behind there? And so what we're finding is, as we're campaigning, the closer we tie to the country teams, the closer we get into the ambassadors' spaces and talk with them about what's really going on, the more that we take our intelligence people and not really apply them to targeting of any kind, but understanding the operational environment, that campaign becomes richer. We start to produce admirable results in the region that we otherwise might not have. So what we're doing is we're trying to take military things and use them less militarily, but to help us to understand. There's nothing more powerful than a young soldier who's culturally astute. Nothing in the world is more powerful than that. I don't care about the number of ships that go through a passage through the Taiwan Straits. I don't care about the number of planes you fly around. I don't care about the number of generals that you shake out, Army generals in that region going to a whole bunch of meetings. There's nothing more powerful than a culturally astute and aware soldier on the ground working partner to partner.
You've talked about the importance of building relationships and ultimately capacity with partner countries. From China's perspective, they can spin this as a grand effort to contain China's natural and deserved ambitions for regional influence. How do you respond to that? What's you're doing operational things, which does not necessarily equate to preparing for war, right, though there are some parallels, obviously. How do you respond to we're creating conditions that are worse than if we weren't here, which is a typical Chinese argument?
Yeah, I think I always find it to be quite specious until I look at the geography. In Japan, the way that they see a map, in the Western world, we're very much north-south on all of our maps, right? Everybody can agree to that. If you're an American, the way you look at the map is America's in the center, and then you've got Canada and whatever they're doing up there, Okay, we don't even make lines in Canada. It's just like a green amorphous blob on top of the United States. But all our states are divided, and sometimes we have like little things like this is the corn state, and this is the Huskers, and we put all these things on our map, and then we know that there's Mexico down there, or whatever they're doing down there in South America. Then I know it sort of breaks to the right, and then I think it spins back around, and that's South America. The Japanese look at maps east up. Imagine that. Imagine you're China and you're looking at a map that's east up. If you look at it, Japan is a hat on top of China. And if you're a Chinese and you're looking at this map, you have to think, they're trying to prevent us from getting to where we want to be. We just want to live our lives. And it's like, blink, blink, blink. We don't, this Belt and Road Initiative, this is for everybody. It's not just for us. Everybody's going to benefit from this. And I would encourage you, too, to look at the Belt and Road and look at water. Start thinking about water, sources of water, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand. Look at water in that region. Look at water look at water and resources as it transits Africa and see where the Belt and Road Initiative is going there. Look at it as it goes into the stands. But just take some time and look at maps and understand what this is doing and what the implications are. That was unsolicited, but I'm giving you that for free. But when I look at a map of Japan, it changes the way that I act. So we want to make sure that the things that we do in the region are at the behest of our partners and not because we want to. So if I go to Japan and they ask me questions about, hey, what do you think about us putting these weapons down in the Southwest Islands of Japan? That's a loaded question. So should you ever be in Japan and someone asks you about, the militarization of the Southwest Islands, don't answer the question. Just say, hey, that's what you guys have to do. You have to figure that out because they are a hat on top, and it can put us in a poor position. What I can't do as an operational commander is impact the strategic to the point where the strategic is unable to accomplish the things that they need time and space to do. So I think that we have to always understand, and that's why I really mentioned the water piece and the resources piece, because there are things that nation believes that they have to have in order to operate freely. But there are also things that impact our partners greatly. There's been a sort of a softening of relationships with Vietnam. They're looking to observe some of the exercises that we're doing on pathways. And the reason why is because on pathways, what we do is there's always a humanitarian disaster relief component of a pathways exercise, every one that we go on. Why? Because that's the thing that's most likely to happen. We were just, anybody that understands the weather system that just crushed Guam. Well, some of the nations that we participate in exercises with were looking to come in and help, unsolicited. But on pathways, that's why there's also a computer exercise where we sort of play a war game or run a simulation that's not necessarily on war, but how we might come together and work together. Those things happen on pathways. And all those things are important, and they're of value to the nations that we work with as they seek to professionalize their service of arms. And nothing's the matter with it. We're not bringing large pieces of equipment. This isn't a move to the Middle East, nor should it ever appear to be that. What we're doing is developing relationships. What we're doing is working on those 3 types of interoperability that everybody knows about, right? There's the human interoperability, there's the procedural interoperability, and then there's the technological interoperability. Does your stuff work with our stuff? That's all we're trying to determine. And as long as we can do those things ahead of time, we don't necessarily have to get ourselves on a warlike footing. What we're doing is we're sustaining our relationships and our ability to interoperate. Is that a word? Can you use it that way? Any school teachers in here? I did. Interoperate. That's what I should have done. Now that's legit.
I've got one more question and then invite our audience to move to the mics and ask a question. One of the things you've talked about is the importance of sustainability in support of the joint force. And Army has uniquely important roles in this dimension. And relatedly is the discussion about interior lines, which is military terminology, but it's critically important. Talk a little bit about sustainability and the interaction with the concept of interior lines.
Yeah. And so when you, has anybody ever read The Long Telegram by George Kennan? Have you ever seen that? We're working on an article now called The Long Tweet. Okay. And here's why. Number one, the title is hecka catchy. But here's why. Because what we want to do is try to frame the things that we're seeing with actions. If we can frame the things that we're seeing, if we can define the problem that we're seeking to solve in the region, and then talk about means that we can use operationally to solve that challenge, now we've got a way forward. And so part of sustainability is making sure that the person that follows me recognizes I'm of reasonable intelligence and they don't have to change everything that we've done over the past 3 years. But the only way you can do that is by writing. And you've got to write. And we talk about this a lot in the command right now. I want people to write. And part of this long tweet is going to be these things that we're calling the 3 kings, the 3 kings of the Asian Pacific. Those things are posture, of which interior lines is a part. It's protection, the ability to protect things that are important to other people. And then it's sustainment. How do we get into this region so far away? Think back to the map that was up before, so many miles away. But we've got to be there. We've got to be there credibly. We've got to be able to sustain ourselves, recognizing that we can't get everything that we need from our partners. So how do we sustain the things that we're doing long? How do we ensure that we can help to establish the interior lines? I would respectfully submit to you that those interior lines are set already. We have allies in the region. We have a treaty for the defense of the Philippines. We have a treaty for the defense of Japan. We have a treaty for the defense of Korea. Those are locations that give us posture and in turn give us interior lines. We have a reason to be there. I just saw on a show this morning, every zone. It was just on a podcast I was listening to this morning. It was crazy. But we have a reason to be there. We have a reason for being there. Those things have to be nurtured and maintained. For over 70 years, right, Madam Counselor? We've been in Korea, over 70 years. And these things take time. And where we don't have those long-term relationships like we have with Korea and Japan and Australia, we've got to develop those things. But you can only develop those things. And I take very seriously this building of these interior lines that come by virtue of the partnerships that we develop and drive into the region, which is why I'm always talking to you about, talking with you about why it's important for me to get somebody from MBR forward with me. Because I want to bring them with me. Why? Because if they see it, then they can write about it. And if they write about it, they can talk about it. And they'll go to places where I can't be, that I don't have access to, absolutely. And we'll keep talking about this, about why are we where we are and what do we need to do to get there and to stay there. There's a recognition in our core that I can't take everybody. Nobody wants to see 60,000 people from America's First Corps anywhere all together. But if I give it to you in small doses, like you wouldn't want to hear me tomorrow, you got me today. But if I come back a year from now, you'll be like, man, I wouldn't mind hearing Brunson again. So that's the approach that we take in the region. We take small pieces of our core and get it in as many places as we can. But they're credible pieces that help our partners to accomplish the things that are important to them. It would do me no good to just send stuff willy-nilly across the region. Pathways provides a framework for us to get to where we need to be. And we operate within that framework, again, north, center, south. We get there, and then what we're trying to do is ensure that we build the relationships leader to leader that will allow us to sustain, that I can say, when directed, we can go there because I know General Bronner, who's the chief of the Philippine National Defenses. And General Bronner wants us to be there. I can do that because I say I'm partnered with the GCC, the Ground Combatant Command in Japan, at Camp Asaka in Osaka. I'm partnered there with them over the course of Yamasakura. We can do that because I can point to other places around the region where I'm tied to leaders to accomplish tasks.
It did. Thank you. 2 quick comments before we hear from Admiral Greenert. First, there's multiple things going on here. One, you just heard a pitch from General Brunson to the members of my board of directors who are here, and I'm sure there'll be follow-up from that. Nice move. And then secondly, to my MBR colleague, Nadej Roland, who you didn't hear, but Nadej is French. Nadej, we finally found someone with a worse French accent than me. In general, sorry, but that took me.
It was horrible. I know it was. I was at the École though when I was at CGSC. I didn't speak French then. There was an open spot for the trip, so I went to Paris. It's pretty neat. Good time.
Happy for you.
Good time.
Admiral Grainert.
Congratulations, not only in your career, but the vocation that your extended family has chosen. That's really remarkable.
sir.
And I congratulate you that everybody should have such a concept. The theater, as you described, is enormous, and so are your tasks. Could you give us just an idea of your logistics concepts? I mean, how the heck you get there, as you said. So how do we sustain ourselves, and what are the big challenges as you've studied this for a while?
Yes, sir. So, Admiral, one of the things that I probably should have mentioned is there are about 120 some odd C-17 large cargo aircraft that are at Joint Base Lewis-McChord. We've got 40 of them. But they're there, but they're always going somewhere else and doing something else. The easy button would be put it on a C-17, get it into the region. It doesn't happen that way. Those planes are all accounted for by Transcom, and they're on different missions all over the world. So one of the things that we have to do with posture is, what do we need forward all the time? And what will our partners allow us to do? We're the guys from First Group. It's you all there. So First Group has these wonderful footprints in the Philippines and in Thailand that, at least while Ben John is the commander of the group, he's allowing me to leave certain things, pieces of equipment, communications, some just the ancillary items, sir, that are required to run operations. We just put them in containers and leave them forward because it's easier for me to use intra-theater transit than inter-theater. If I tell somebody I need something moved from Joint Base Lewis-McChord, Washington, into Thailand, they're going to be like, okay, well, we're going to put it on this boat, see? And it's going to take this boat 90 days to get into the theater, and then you'll have it. And you're like, but I'm leaving next month. So everything that we do has got these long, extended lines. And I touched on it briefly about the planning that's required before we move out on these exercises because we can't go back. But there's also, sir, this reliance that we've recognized over time that we have to have on our partners. Now, I don't need all classes of supply and support and sustainment, but I do need certain things. So if there's a building I can operate out of in nation X, then that means I don't have to bring tonnage. If there are places where we can get class 1, which is food, which is important to all of us, if we can get food there, we can get food stores there, then we don't have to bring that with us. And so we start to try to shrink these packages that we push forward so that we can sustain ourselves for longer periods of time. But it starts with, how do we posture in the region before anything even happens? Something that we've always known, but somehow we get in the Pacific and we go, yeah, whatever, we'll figure it out. Well, we don't have time to figure it out. We've got to figure it out now. So what we're trying to do, sir, is everywhere I go on exercise, I'm trying to locate the things that I can leave behind so that we don't have to get them. MREs have a shelf life of 25 to 30 years, and which is amazing because it's the only thing I've seen that you can ingest that it's got a window. As long as you eat it in 25 to 30 years, you're good. 30 years in a day, this is horrible. Don't even eat it. But we can put that forward. I mean, sir, you know how much that would cube out an aircraft if we had to carry class 1 forward for, let's say, 5,000 people. So that's 3 meals a day per person that you'd have to carry forward. But even not trying to rely on the logistics system to move it for me, that's pallet space I could use for other pieces of equipment or things that might be absolutely important. Maybe a partner needs me to get a dozer forward to try to shore up a riverbank or do another service project within their country. That dozer can take that spot. So that's what we're trying to do, is how do we posture? That I can do. That nobody should have to tell me to do. The Indo-PACOM commander, Admiral Aquilino, and General Flynn should not have to tell me to posture myself for continuous operations forward. That's what I'm supposed to figure out as the operational commander. So we're working that hard right now, sir. Thanks for the question, sir, and great to see you again.
Dr. Rich Ellings, 30-year president of MBR, my predecessor.
General, what what a great presentation. How stretched thin are you? We've got emergencies in Europe. We have emergency in the Middle East. I'm aware that sometimes your Corps has to send things and people and stuff all over the world. As we have more problems in different regions, are you being more stretched?
Hey, sir, first of all, thank you for the kindness that you paid me by saying what you did to start out with your question. Because it's so close to December, Admiral Greenert could not do the same. He had to talk about my family. So it's almost Army-Navy game time. It's about to get real. Here's what I would tell you is there's something really unique about America's First Corps. We are the only corps that is assigned to a combatant command. So my only mission right now, other than sending out some ancillary things like what we call a movement, it's really a port opening team that we've had to send different places to help to marshal items that have to get around the world, either to Ukraine or to Israel, that are going to aerial ports of debarkation and embarkation, and sea ports of embarkation and debarkation. I have to send those small teams out. That's like 3 people, a 3-man team. But there aren't very many of those in the Army. First Corps has the bulk of them within our 593rd Expeditionary Support Command. So those folks have to go out. But the Corps itself is absolutely aligned with the Theater Cooperation Plan and the Theater Security Plan for Indo-PACOM. That's what we're focused on. Again, as you mentioned, it's almost like you're working in my headquarters. There are capabilities that are being asked for, material that's being asked for. For example, we sent 18 artillery pieces to Ukraine, and we've just recently gotten those replaced by the department. We sent those from Alaska, and all we did was some of those 40 C-17s from my base flew up to Alaska. They loaded the artillery pieces up. They flew them over to Ukraine to be brought into actions going on there. But we're not stretched. And what we've got to try to make sure of, though, what is important about your question is I've got to look at the pathway, which is our ability to campaign, and always weigh, do I have enough to do what I've been asked to do?
And that's mainly the Korean Peninsula, I assume, is the ultimate responsibility. Is that right?
That's one of the ultimates. There are a host of ultimates out there, sir. But it's also, what's important that you mentioned that is we've got longstanding partners on the Korean Peninsula. Some 70 plus years that we've been together working there. And there are also U.S. forces there. And part of our posture in our interior lines, bless you, is the fact that we have people in places right now that we've got to, and it's not really get credit for, but we have to acknowledge that. As an operating force, as a joint force, we've got to acknowledge where we already are and kind of say, you know what? Good job, Department of Defense. We've got people forward already that can do certain missions.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, sir.
Please.
Hello, Dave Bryant, retired Navy.
Oh,
The goal of the military really is peace.
yes, sir.
And obviously you're doing a lot of the interaction with our allies and all the rest. But my question is, as part of all this, we have great relations with our biggest trading partner in the world, China. And do you host military to military get-togethers with mainland China as part of building pathways?
Sir, I will tell you honestly, no, that's not my bailiwick. It's not. The goal is no war. The goal is for someone to wake up in Beijing and say, yeah, not today, not today, not today. And we achieve that by posturing ourselves and being credible within the region. Those engagements happen at levels beyond me, way beyond me. But we do see the Chinese on exercises. We see them every year at Cobra Gold in Thailand. Every year, they're there. We interact with them in ways that people in civilized societies interact with one another. What's up? What's up? I mean, it's just the way it goes down. I mean, anybody that's either married or that's a man that resonates with you, I know. I mean, we see them out all the time. But also there's a thing that occurs as we're out on exercise where we're always trying to capture reflections on what our actions are doing against the adversary. How are they moving based on things that we're doing? There's when the quad is afloat, I always, whenever I see that the quad is afloat, I immediately just get up on social media and type quad, right? And I get in search engine and I type quad. And the reason why I do that is because you can see that other things are happening when that's happening. And if you have data miner, I don't know if anybody here has data miner on your phone, you can put certain alerts in that thing and you'll see, there was almost a naval incident that happened in the South China Sea just this week because, not a true story, but just this week because these ships came in contact with these ships. When we go to different places, like as we transited back and forth from Australia to Guam to the Philippines, there was a rise in the Spratlys of traffic of fishing vessels. Okay, so we notice these things in the region. There are strategic high-level conversations that occur. I think that they'll happen again soon as the Chinese have almost set themselves up as a guarantor of peace in the Middle East now, as they continue to try to work that. But for our part, it's when we show ourselves forward, the best way that we can communicate intentions and intent is by being and professionalizing the armies that we work with every day in the region. That's the best thing that I can do.
It's an amazing hour with you, General Brunson. Thanks so much. Any final words?
I would tell you that I think that the problems that MBR is looking to help to develop solutions to, the discussions that you all have, the frank discussions that you'll have, the writing that will come of you all being together is absolutely critical. And that I think we've come to the end of ourselves as a military where we realize that pure military solutions aren't going to solve anything. It's a recognition that there are a host of capabilities that exist across the government, to include think tanks like this one, that are going to help us to come to the solutions for this brave new future that we're all wading into. Thank you for your time and attention, and thank you again, sir, for the opportunity.